Good afternoon. 5:06 now, News Talk 105.9 WMAL, where we're making sense of the news. Coming up this hour, Julie Kelly gives us an update on the sentencing of a veteran Purple Heart recipient involving a January 6th fence that was destroyed. We will chat with her on that subject coming up, and we'll talk to you at 888-630-9625, 888-630-WMAL. A top Justice Department official apparently tried to get to the IRS whistleblowers before their congressional testimony, just to find out what was going on. What are you going to say to Congress? And it's kind of interesting. We're learning a lot right now about the Justice Department and its involvement in the Hunter Biden investigation or non-investigation, take your pick. But for more on this, I want to turn to the White House correspondent for the New York Post, Stephen Nelson, who joins us on the phone. Stephen, good to talk to you today, sir.
Great to be back, Vince.
It's so you've got a report here that you put out overnight last night on the Justice Department and its contacts with Hunter Biden as well as the whistleblower teams. What can you tell us?
Sure. So I would assume that you, of course, and many of your listeners are familiar broadly with the claims of the IRS whistleblowers, the two men who investigated Hunter Biden for tax fraud and other crimes for several years, or 5 years in one case. They alleged that there was a Department of Justice cover-up, essentially, that shielded President Biden and also shielded Hunter from more severe penalties. The latest development is a little bit complicated, and I'm going to try to put it in really simple terms for the radio audience, because this is a bit more complex than previous revelations from the whistleblowers. But essentially what happened is a senior Justice Department official, someone at the main Justice Department, an associate deputy attorney general, reached out to both the whistleblowers' attorneys and convened a meeting with Hunter Biden's attorneys and Delaware U.S. Attorney Weiss. Why this matters, and of course this is a bit confusing as I prefaced, why this matters is because it gives the appearance that the main Justice Department was steering the ship rather than Weiss's office when it comes to the Hunter Biden investigation.
Yes.
And that's important, of course, because Attorney General Merrick Garland said under oath that Weiss was independent and there would be no political interference in the case. And these latest revelations regarding the senior Justice Department officials' actions call into question whether Weiss truly was independent or whether he was not, as accused.
And Garland has insisted over and over, as you just said, that David Weiss had broad authority, that he was independent, that he could take this investigation anywhere he wanted, and that there would be no interference. And sure enough, now we keep finding out more and more information. Actually, the people who work much more directly for Merrick Garland seem to have a hand in the way that this Hunter Biden investigation was going.
Right. And, it's frankly kind of amazing that we've gone so many months without Merrick Garland appearing on Capitol Hill to answer these questions. They've really lingered for months. And sometime this fall, of course, he is going to be going to the Hill and will be asked directly. But the whistleblowers said that that Delaware U.S. Attorney Weiss, he attempted to bring tax fraud charges, including felonies, against Hunter Biden in Los Angeles and Washington, D.C., where he earned the money related to his foreign business dealings and where he lived at the time, but was blocked by U.S. attorneys appointed by President Biden. Now, Weiss and Garland have both kind of given the impression that that's not accurate in public statements, but they haven't really been put under oath and really grilled on this matter. And this latest revelation seems to bolster the accusation that Weiss was not indeed in charge.
Yeah, and these whistleblowers in their testimony, which was jaw-dropping and unfortunate for our country, if it's true, what they described is you have Justice Department officials who are constantly working to mitigate any concern or inquiry into the Biden family, to include people who were working within David Weiss's office. A woman by the name of Leslie Wolf kept on popping up as interfering in the Biden investigation and saying that investigators couldn't go down the road of asking about dad or the big guy. That really stands out.
Well, I mean, there's a real litany of allegations here. Not only that you're not supposed to be asking about dad or the big guy. The IRS investigators allegedly did not get full access to Hunter Biden's laptop. They weren't told about the $10 million bribe allegation involving the Ukrainian gas company Burisma, despite that being referred to Weiss's office. Leslie Wolf and her team allegedly tipped off Hunter Biden's attorneys to a plan to search their a storage locker in Northern Virginia that had corporate material in it, allegedly blocked an attempt to search a cottage on President Biden's Wilmington home, allegedly tipped off Hunter Biden's legal team about an intended approach to interview him about the allegations against him. It's a real long list here. And this matters, of course, in part because House Republicans are preparing likely to launch an impeachment inquiry to President Biden's role in his son's business dealings. And of course, the alleged cover-up of the investigation into his son's business dealings is going to be an important part of that impeachment inquiry.
Have you noticed anything different at the White House as you cover the White House and talk to White House officials? I did see, for instance, after Joe Biden returned from his many vacations, that I saw there was a clip of Peter Doocy trying to get his attention. And it was one of the first times I've ever seen Biden not actually give Peter Doocy his attention. He refused. He just looked around the room. Doocy kept saying, Mr. President, Mr. President, Mr. President, and finally just asked him, how's the campaign going? Trying to draw him out. Nothing. He couldn't get him to speak at all. Have you noticed kind of a vibe shift at the White House on talking to the press, especially on questions like this?
Yeah, I think that's a smart observation of yours. Karine Jean-Pierre has not called on me to ask her a question in 3 months. The New York Post, which I represent in the briefing room, we're the second most read U.S. newspaper when you count online traffic. We're fourth largest in print. The White House press secretary has just blackballed us because this has, of course, been an area that we've covered very closely since reporting on Hunter Biden's laptop. President Biden himself, I have asked him many times various questions about this matter. He very effectively brushes them off. Just today, I asked him about House Speaker McCarthy's request that President Biden turn over his personal bank records to Congress. President Biden chuckled to himself and said, let's talk about, why we're here at FEMA headquarters. But he had taken 3 totally unrelated questions about FEMA and the hurricanes just before that. So he clearly has no desire to directly engage with the substance or with the congressional oversight. The press secretary, it's basically the same deal. This obviously is going to have to change when Republicans launch an impeachment inquiry, as seems inevitable.
Yes. And the White House continues to take this tact of trying to establish distance from Hunter Biden, suggesting that these are his problems. He's a private citizen. If you have any questions, you should ask his representatives. This has nothing to do with Joe Biden. And the response to that is that actually it has everything to do with him. It's about the ethics of the White House and Hunter Biden's access to power and the ways in which he used that. It seems like the kind of questions the White House should be answering.
Well, part of the way you establish distance is you don't engage with people who are asking questions or people who are likely to raise these matters. One of the amazing things that Hunter Biden's former business partner, Devin Archer, revealed on July 31st was that Joe Biden, as sitting vice president, attended not 1 but 2 dinners in Georgetown with his son's Kazakhstani, Russian, and Ukrainian benefactors. And I don't think that has been raised in the briefing room. It's just amazing. Devin Archer also said that Joe Biden was on 20 speakerphone calls with business partners. He said that the founder of Burisma, who allegedly gave a bribe to the Bidens, slipped away for a private call to Washington with Hunter. He said that President Biden had coffee with the incoming CEO of a Chinese state-backed investment fund that Hunter launched 2 weeks after he arrived with his father on Air Force Two in Beijing. There are a series of just really spectacular allegations out there, but the White House manages, as you say, to create distance by just not really engaging in them. We don't hear anything about them. Which has been kind of remarkable.
And it's also target rich too, Stephen. It must drive you crazy not to have these questions even asked or have an opportunity to ask them on a very frequent basis, because as you're talking about all of these arrangements, I was just thinking, when Joe Biden came into office, Hunter Biden, and I know you asked about this, he kept having, he held an equity stake in this Chinese private equity firm for a while. And the question kept being put to the White House. I believe it was you who kept asking, when are you going to divest? When are you going to divest? When is Hunter going to divest from this thing? He finally divests, and he sells it to Kevin Morris, the Hollywood attorney, who then turns around and finances Hunter Biden's tax debts and then pays for flying him to and from his Arkansas paternity hearings. And everything. So it's like the whole thing is like a really important a series of events that require more questions and answers.
Yeah, and well, I mean, you mentioned that, but there's a whole lot more. There was a report that the First Son has sold more than $1 million worth of art to anonymous buyers. You know, one buyer, I think, bought almost $900,000 worth of the art. I think it was 1.3 million in total. But I mean, we don't know who this anonymous buyer is, and we know that one of the other people who was identified, she frequently has visited the White House, including to meet with the president, and got a appointment to a presidential board. You know, I don't think that there's been much direct questioning about that in the briefing room either. The White House just really has not addressed it. These things do break through occasionally. There was the allegation made by the IRS whistleblowers that there was a WhatsApp message sent by Hunter Biden to a Chinese government-linked business associate saying that I'm sitting here with my father and there will be retribution if a agreed-upon business deal is not fulfilled. 10 days within 10 days of that, $5.1 million was transferred to Biden-linked accounts. In that instance, it really did break through in the briefing room, and they had to address it. But there are, as you mentioned, a real constellation of things here. It's a target-rich environment, and so many of the targets are never really aired.
Finally, in terms of the logistics of how close Biden gets to the press or whether or not he ever has to answer questions, I know you've been working there for a while. Have you seen it change? Have they tightened up the opportunities that reporters even have a chance to ask questions?
You know, I haven't really noticed a whole lot in that regard. Earlier in his presidency, they very tightly controlled the reporters allowed near him. They had a system where you had to RSVP electronically for all of the large indoor events, and then they would mysteriously select who got to go in. And that caused a real uproar among the press because certain people were clearly being discriminated against, and most of the press corps signed on to a letter challenging that. And so they've eased up on those kind of access restrictions. And in terms of him taking questions, you know, he does it sometimes, but there are different ways that, you know, presidents differ from you know, person to person. And President Trump, you know, he did a lot of interviews. He did a lot of press conferences. Biden does very few interviews or press conferences. He is yet to, as president, do an interview with a print newspaper reporter who might drill down on some of these things. And he hasn't done a major press conference really since last year. They're mostly the foreign leader ones, which frankly can be kind of staged. You know, 2 Americans or 1 American, and, you know, however many foreign reporters get selected, and
Yes.
those really don't have the variability in them that a freewheeling press conference might.
That's right. And there's a lot of behind-the-scenes horse trading that usually leads to those to who gets called upon for those questions, too. It's kind of the whole thing is wild. Stephen Nelson, White House correspondent for the New York Post, I really appreciate your time as always, and please keep asking all the important questions whenever you get the opportunity. Thank you, sir. If you ever look at old photos of Biden from, say, I don't know, 5 years ago versus now, you'll notice something. He used to have a lot more skin. He's lost a lot of it because it's all been sucked back to his face in plastic surgery. There was a piece on this during the 2020 election, a great piece on this written by Joe Simonson, our buddy over at the Washington Examiner, and he spoke to plastic surgeons and experts, and they said, yeah, he got plastic surgery. It's not very good, but he definitely got a lot of plastic surgery. And now we have an update to this saga. We were just talking to Stephen Nelson from the New York Post. The New York Post has a piece this week where they emphasize there's a doctor by the name of Dr. Gary Motycki who has a TikTok channel, because I guess everybody has TikTok channels now. He's a plastic surgeon out in California. He is very familiar with plastic surgery, you know, working there in California. And here's what he has to say about what he's observed on Biden's body.
President Biden's colleagues are now accusing him of having too much plastic surgery. Do we think he's had plastic surgery? President Biden is now 82 years old. I think he's definitely had some plastic surgery.
He's actually 80. This guy got that wrong. He's not 82 yet.
And I don't think it's necessarily recent plastic surgery. I think he's had procedures throughout the years. And he has some of the telltale signs of plastic surgery. Starting with his hair, we can see that even 30, 40 years ago, his hair was thinning quite dramatically. And then we see some signs that he underwent a hair transplant procedure. And probably one of the older techniques, because you can see some of the unnaturalness to the hairline and the way that the hair was grafted.
So not a very good one. In other words, the hair looks kind of crappy.
Secondly, if we look at his brow, there's some telltale signs there, particularly if we think about other actors like Burt Reynolds or singers like Kenny Rogers. He has that same look to the upper brow and upper eyes where there's an unnatural appearance to the lines. If we look at his brow lines on the side, normally they would come like this and come down slightly, but on him we see they're turned up and going this way. So at some point he definitely had some sort of a brow lift procedure.
Yeah, his eyebrows kind of have like a Joker quality. Like there's something weird going on. They head off in the wrong direction.
And in men, as I always say, it can make them look feminine or a little odd in the brow. And we see that in President Biden. Secondly, he has some telltale signs of a facelift. He definitely has slight pixie ears. We see again the pole on the side of his face.
Pixie ears, holy cow. Yeah, no, people have noticed his earlobes definitely changed. And I've said it before, this is what's led a bunch of people to believe that there's a body double. It's a different person, they replaced him.
Also, when he's turned to the side in certain angles, we can see some of the signs near the ear and in the neck here where it looks like at some point he had a facelift. Next, if we go to his eyes, we do see throughout the years that he had some prominent eye bags where he was looking tired. Then we see them kind of go away, come back a little, go away. Also, you can see a change in his eye shape, possibly a little bit to the brow, but also the upper eyes and under his eyes, we can see again the signs that a lower blepharoplasty was done because his eye shape is quite dramatically changed here, as well a little bit of bunching of the skin there. Then I think throughout the years, he's probably done touch-ups with Botox and fillers. But overall, I think he's had a significant amount of plastic surgery throughout his career.
You do have to wonder, like, all this vacation he takes, do you think he's getting, like, touch-up jobs on his face? Is that one of the things they're doing? Just pump him with more botulism. The Botox. Just, deaden everything else. His brain is gone. Let's get rid of some of those wrinkles. What is happening? Biden, they say he doesn't get out of bed before 10 a.m. The guy's a medical mystery. And so we're left to speculate from the outside. An expert plastic surgeon saying, yeah, this guy's had a ton of work. He estimates Biden has spent well over $100,000 to become the creature he is today. Coming up, Julie Kelly joins us. We'll talk about a dramatic sentencing today of a Proud Boy defendant involving January 6th. The saga of this regime destroying their political opponents continues. Julie Kelly with the details. Well, good afternoon to you. It is 5:34 here on News Talk 105.9 WMAL, where we're making sense of the news. You can join us today by dialing 888-630-9625, 888-630-WMAL. Earlier in the program, I told you about a veteran, a U.S. Army veteran and Purple Heart recipient by the name of Joe Biggs, identified in the media as an organizer for the Proud Boys, who was sentenced today to 17 years in prison for the events of January 6th, the second longest such sentence handed out for that date. He's accused of helping to tear a fence down. So the court considers that an act of terrorism. For more on this, I want to turn to a woman who was in the courtroom. Julie Kelly joins us now. Julie, good to have you with us.
Hey, Vince. Thanks for having me on.
And I should point out, as always, she's the author of Declassified by Julie Kelly, the Substack. It's excellent. Julie, tell us what happened here.
I mean, it's like you're living in La La Land. You have Joe Biden's Department of Justice, DC U.S. Attorney Matthew Graves, who's handling all these January 6 cases, put forward seditious conspiracy charges against people like Joe Biggs. They're convicted, of course, by a DC jury. And then they go to the to the courts. And in this case, it's Judge Tim Kelly, an alleged conservative judge appointed by Donald Trump, and asked him for 33 years in prison for Joe Biggs. Now, what did Joe Biggs do? Nothing violent. He didn't bring a weapon. He didn't attack any lawmakers. He didn't assault police officers. The fence shaking incident was really shaking part of a temporary metal fence. That is the incident that Matthew Graves and the Department of Justice claim under the statute in very vague language that he destroyed government property, and therefore that rises to a crime, a federal crime of terrorism. Now, any judge with half a brain or a conscience or anything would say this is so out of bounds. But no, we're talking about Judge Tim Kelly, who did not do that and went along with Joe Biden's Department of Justice, claiming that shaking a temporary metal fence on the outside of the U.S. Capitol is indeed a crime of terrorism, and therefore he considered the sentencing enhancement of up to 10 extra years in prison on top of the other convictions that Joe
First of all,
Biggs has.
I mean, a lot of things jump to mind here. One of them is if shaking a fence is your best example of terrorism, you don't have a terrorism case. I mean, that's the most impressive thing they could bring before the court. Come on, that's the silliest thing I've ever heard. The other is, shouldn't this have actually been, just as a basic constitutional principle, isn't this the kind of thing that should be litigated in front of a jury and a judge doesn't just decide, yep, it's an act of terrorism, and then slaps on more time?
Well, you would think so, but this is based on the federal sentencing guidance. You know, there was a commission, and then they came up with sentencing guidance. Now, Judge Kelly doesn't have to go along with it, and he did not give the full amount the DOJ had requested based on those guidance. But the mere fact that you have a conservative Trump-appointed federal judge who has now codified the shaking of a metal fence as a crime of terrorism, think of the long-term consequences of that. And this is now has a judge's federal imprimatur on it. But it's not only that crime, Vince, it's obstruction of an official proceeding that now is a federal crime of terrorism. Conspiracy to obstruct is a federal crime of terrorism. These are the sort of nebulous, vague, weaponized laws that have been exploited by the Department of Justice. But now judges like Tim Kelly and Amit Mehta, an Obama-appointed judge, have now said, yes, these rise to federal crimes of terrorism.
And I can't help but notice, you know, all of the other many events that involved a lot more damage than fence shaking that the left perpetrated on the country with no meaningful consequences like this. When you have a courthouse, a federal courthouse in Portland that was under sustained assault for months, that was where you had cops routinely attacked and blinded by lasers and Molotov cocktails thrown and all sorts of destruction. The destruction at the White House in 2020, none of this with any meaningful consequence. And now this man, Joseph Biggs, is being given 17 years for shaking a fence.
Vince, aside from that, think of what happened in Washington, D.C. for weeks, just 6 months before January 6th. You had people across the street from the White House trying to tear down barriers and fences to the White House, trying to scale walls to get into the White House, prompting the lockdown of Donald Trump and his family. They were burning things across the street, like the basement of St. John's Church right across the street from the White House. They were tearing down fences that federal police officers had installed in that area on federal property. Not only none of those people even arrested or charged, any charges that were made have been dropped by the same D.C. U.S. Attorney's Office, now declaring shaking part of a metal fence a crime of terrorism. I mean, this is the sort of double standard hypocrisy that makes Americans, well, at least Americans on our side, infuriated. The events of 2020 that summer have been completely memory holed, completely forgiven and forgotten. But yet, here is Joe Biggs, who, by the way, has already been in prison for 30 months because Judge Kelly denied his release repeatedly, awaiting trial. So and as he explained today, 22 hours, sometimes up to 22 hours a day in solitary confinement. And so now his torment is going to continue. A man who committed no violence aside from shaking a fence and going into the Capitol building, a public building on a Wednesday afternoon, twice that day.
My understanding is that the events inside that courtroom today were rather emotional, Julie Kelly, and that he, of course, appealed and said to the judge that he doesn't think he should serve that time. He would not like to serve that time because he has a young daughter to attend to. Can you give us a sense of what went down as Joseph Biggs made his case?
It was emotional. He broke down at one point, obviously, said all he wants to do is get home to his daughter, to drive her to school and pick her up. He's basically a single father. And, you know, people supporters in the courtroom were sobbing along with him and, you know, sobbing as they were anticipating Judge Kelly's verdict, sentencing that was going to come down. So it was emotional. You know, there was another emotional day yesterday, Vince, as Judge Mehta sentenced a 61-year-old grandmother from Florida who went inside the Capitol for 18 minutes, sentenced her to 15 months in prison. She's already been on home detention for 2.5 years wearing an ankle monitor. She has no criminal history either. She did nothing violent on January 6th. This is nothing more than a Marxist-type, banana republic-style judicial and legal system in our own nation's capital These people are not only completely flouting the Constitution and the rule of law, but they have no humanity. They have no compassion. They are soulless, vindictive, and in some cases sadistic people who enjoy inflicting pain on Americans because they did not support Joe Biden in the last election.
What a bunch of disgraceful people. And what we're looking at is political imprisonment. So now we've got grandmothers. You said 81 years old? That's how old she is?
61.
Oh, excuse me, 61. I misheard
it. It's been a
it.
long week.
But still, 61 years old, and now going to serve well over a year in prison. And you get an Army veteran whose nation gave him a Purple Heart because of wounds that he sustained on behalf of our country, is now going to be looking at 17 years in jail, in addition to the time that he spent in solitary confinement already.
That's right. Then he'll be unsupervised released. And I mean, look, Joe Biggs' life is destroyed. Everyone who has been ensnared in this, whether it's Joe Biggs, convicted of seditious conspiracy, or petty offenses like parading in the Capitol, or Connie Meggs, the 61-year-old grandmother who, by the way, her husband Kelly, as a member of the Oath Keepers, Judge Maida sentenced him to 12 years in prison. So you're going to have a family without parents, 2 children, 3 grandchildren without parents, because Judge Maida, an Obama appointee, and Joe Biden's Department of Justice want to make an example of them, not just punish them, but show Americans on the right, if you protest, if you come up against this regime, if you do anything that we don't approve of, not only will you go to prison, your spouse can go to prison if she was there as well, and your whole family will be bankrupted, decimated, and destroyed.
Is it your view, you may have already have said this, but I just want to hear it, is it your view that the United States District Court for the District of Columbia should be defunded and collapsed?
The D.C. District Court should be collapsed. The D.C. U.S. Attorney's Office should be collapsed, and so too should the Washington FBI Field Office. That is the rot of corruption in our country right now. All they do is work collaboratively to investigate, arrest, prosecute, whether it's Donald Trump down to, a supporter, grandma from Florida or grandma from Indiana. Vince, this week, I think I've seen the most arrests in the January 6th investigation than I've seen in the past few months. I'm getting notifications of a few arrests every day. They are accelerating the pace of this investigation. It's not going away. Matthew Graves, the Biden-appointed D.C. U.S. attorney, has promised to more than double the existing caseload. We could end up with 2,500 or so Americans arrested, charged, destroyed, bankrupted, etc., for even the most minor involvement in the events of January 6th. So anyone who's wishing January 6th away, including some Republican candidates for president, I've got news for you. It's not going anywhere. It's in some ways getting worse.
How could you let it go away? How could you, meaning how could you let your focus slip away from this? And the reality here is this Matthew Graves character, this disgraceful U.S. attorney for D.C. Last year, I brought it up before and I'll reemphasize it now. He did not prosecute 70% of the street arrests made in Washington, D.C. For the criminals that are actually in D.C. committing acts of violence, he didn't prosecute 70% of those cases. He just dropped them. And here he is trying to destroy the lives of grandmothers in their 60s.
Matthew Graves is also the D.C. U.S. attorney who declined to prosecute Hunter Biden for his tax crimes in 2013 and 2014 in Washington, D.C. So he is one of the 2 prosecutors who allegedly David Weiss and the IRS people went to, laid out all the tax crimes that Hunter Biden committed those years, and he declined, I believe, not just once, but twice to prosecute Hunter Biden while he continues to round up, Mimas and people for parading in the Capitol.
Yes.
And I know that Congress has called Matthew Graves in once before. I think they've subpoenaed him again in the Hunter Biden investigation. But look, our side is worn out. We know where this is headed, absolutely nowhere. There will be no consequences. And meanwhile, you've got people like Joe Biggs and Connie Meggs and 1,000+ individuals and counting who are being tormented by this Department of Justice and FBI.
Yeah, and they're all and all of them are sort of test runs and cannon fodder for the big fish, too, because you're watching it play out now with Donald Trump because they're trying to prevent him from even appearing on ballots nationwide at this very moment. And they're using the justice system as their weapon. And they've had a lot of practice on everyday Americans up until this point.
So if you have a federal judge in Washington, D.C. declare that obstruction of an official proceeding and conspiracy to obstruct are crimes of terrorism, those are two of the four counts that special counsel Jack Smith has against Donald Trump. So, of course, if they move forward with that indictment, they don't add charges and defendants, which I'm still expecting that they will. You get a quick conviction by D.C. jury. Of course, they hate Donald Trump. And then what? The same Department of Justice, Jack Smith, goes to Judge Chutkan, Judge Tanya Chutkan, who just compared on Monday, compared January 6th to the Boston Marathon bombing and 9/11. These are the kind of lunatics that populate the D.C. federal courthouse, by the way. So they could very easily go to Judge Chutkan and say, well, of course, he's been convicted of these nonviolent offenses that have nothing to do with a political protest. But, oh, by the way, Judge Amit Mehta has declared that those are crimes of terrorism. So we will seek a similar sentencing enhancement for Donald Trump.
Oh, it makes you so sad for our country, doesn't it? It is just brutal.
It does.
So finally, I mentioned, what should be done here. You obviously recommended a number of, it sounds like great options, getting rid of the U.S. attorney in D.C., getting rid of the justice, not the justice system. We'll still have a justice system, but get rid of the United States District Court for the District of Columbia. Are there any Republicans that you're detecting who are switched on about this? Is hope in sight, Julie Kelly?
I wish I could say that there was. But, I occasionally will get texts from lawmakers, like, saw your tweet and what can we do? And I'm like, I've told you people already. I mean, I'm sorry, I'm very frustrated. This was a long week and it was a very heartbreaking week to see what these people are going through.
Yes.
But, Vince, these lawmakers have no clue what's going on. Not one of them. Can you imagine if you had had 15 Republican lawmakers, including, say, Kevin McCarthy or Jim Jordan, show up in Judge Tim Kelly's courtroom today, or show up to his courtroom Tuesday when he was regurgitating the government's case and hinting that he was going to add this terror enhancement? Do you think he would have said the same thing had they been sitting there? Do you think he would have said something if there was a camera in his courtroom and we could make clips of his outrageous comments, not just this week, throughout the 2.5-year ordeal of these Proud Boys? There hasn't been not one lawmaker has sat in. You don't have to go even in support. Just pay attention. You do still, I believe, and correct me if I'm wrong, but they do still have oversight capability of the judiciary, do they not?
Yes, they do.
I mean, they confirm judges. They pay for the federal courthouse in Washington, D.C., but they can't show up there and see what these people are doing to their own supporters.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Well, we got a lot more browbeating and aggression to do with these Republicans.
We do.
In the meantime, Julie Kelly, please, thank you. God bless you for staying on top of this. And in the end, I hope something very good comes of all of it. If it does, it'll be in no small part because of your work. Thank you, Julie.
Well, that's so kind. And Vince, thank you for covering my work from the very beginning. Really so grateful.
Always. Let's take a phone call. I've got Tom calling in from Washington, D.C., line 2. Tom, good afternoon. You're on the Vince Coglianese Show.
Hi, guys.
Hey, sir.
Thing I wanted to mention here, I said what we saw going all through 2020, 21 and all, the message being sent by these people, the elitists there in D.C., are you can go ahead and burn our cities to the ground. You can attack your fellow citizens, destroy their businesses, beat them to a pulp. You can attack federal police officers elsewhere and shoot lasers in their eyes, and you can do whatever you want. That's perfectly fine. Tear down statues. That was an insurrection. But no, that you can do. But you dare come to us, we the elite, and you dare in any form of protest against us, we'll show you. And that's what this is all about.
Yeah.
It's a threat for the future. They have just told the American people, we're the elite, you can't do anything to us.
Yes, and they will crush the opposition.
Anything you want to each other.
Tom, thank you. We're up against it, but you're totally right. They want to crush their political opponents. You dare speak up, you will be crushed. This is the same. This is the Chuck Schumer thing. You mess with the intel community, they have 6 ways from Sunday to get back at you. What? They're supposed to report to us. It's all too crazy. The great one, Mark Levin, up next on WMAL.